it's 3 o'clock now, but we're going to give everyone a minute or two to get settled in before we start.
Rob, are you at a standing desk?
I am, yes.
Nice, nice.
I did. I switched to one in the middle of all this craziness, and now I don't think I could ever sit at a desk again. I love it.
Yeah, mine goes up and down, so it can be either, but yeah.
This one does too, but I haven't put it down at all.
Yeah, I couldn't live without the option for sure.
So do you have it at your actual office at
yeah.
6? Yeah. I think I'm going to have to ask the team to invest in one for me at the actual office too.
Yeah. I don't have enough space in my home for a dedicated standing desk.
Is that your actual office, or are you in a conference room at the office?
We don't really have offices, but I kind of commandeered this conference room because I needed a place to put a standing desk. So it's like my low-key unofficial office, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah, but we are in we're in a loft in Soho. So it's just a really nice, clean, open floor plan.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right, I think we'll give everyone about 30 more seconds. And we'll jump
in. I mean, I feel like 5 minutes is now just the expectation as we go from Zoom to Zoom, and you hope to get some water.
It really is. Like, yeah, quick water, quick bathroom break.
Yep, totally.
When we pop to 3:03, I'll start. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us today at this Givesley Season Without Swag Thought Leadership Series event. My name is Rob DeSalvo. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at Undertone. I've been at Undertone for about 6.5 years in numerous sales roles and also client experience roles as well. And joining me today is Belinda Smith, who I will let her introduce herself.
Yeah, hi, I am Belinda Smith. I'm the CEO of the Americas for M6. So we are a full service media agency. We're a joint venture between Group M and the And Partnership. I started in January, and my remit is US, Canada, and Latin America.
Awesome. So we're going to discuss some really interesting, important, and fundamental topics that are in the industry today that I think are going to be very interesting to be diving into. We're going to talk about the first ever global DEI census, which revealed major challenges around family status and age and gender, ethnicity, disability. And we're going to also dive into some of the data behind that study and how it can help our industry move forward, how it can help organizations, not only on the media side from an agency standpoint, not only from the vendor side, also from the brand side and all the clients that we work with, but really take action for real change within the industry. So before we dive into some of the questions that we have, Belinda, I'd love for you to just take the audience a little bit into what the global DEI census is and what your involvement in that was.
Yeah, so I always like to joke to people that one of my side jobs, because I feel like I have a lot of them. No, but I'm the co-global diversity ambassador for the WFA. The WFA is the World Federation of Advertisers. Before coming to M6, I was actually the head of global media for electronic arts. While I was in that role, I engaged very deeply with the WFA. And even though I'm no longer at a brand, they allowed me to retain my global diversity ambassadorship. So this year it's me and Jerry Dakin from GSK. He's based out of the UK. We came together. Oh, wow. It feels like it's been eons ago because time is flying. But we came together last year and really thought through, we had a whole in-person agenda planned out for the year, kicking off with Global Marketer Week, about how we were going to talk about DE&I. And of course, when COVID happened and everything went remote, we had to completely rethink the model. And so what we did is we built a D&I task force within the WFA. This is a unique body within the WFA because we open it up to people who are not members of the WFA to participate. And the reason we do that is because we're agitating for progress in the industry. And like, it shouldn't be predicated on your membership status to be able to fight that fight with us. So we all got together and thought, now that everything is fully remote, how can we have the biggest impact and how can we do the most good? And I think what came out of that forum over and over were lots of good ideas, but we felt a little bit helpless to understand the impact of those ideas. And also, honestly, transparently, at least for me, there was frustration with everything that was happening post George Floyd and people, getting to put out press releases and getting to post black squares. And in some cases that not feeling like really real. It felt a little bit like posturing or like bullshit. And so it was like, how do we actually measure where we are, what's good, what's bad, not in the spirit of calling people out, but honestly in the spirit of where are things working really well and what can we learn from those places and those pockets and those communities, and how do we expand success? Because when people come to the WFA and they say, we really want to improve DEI, what are your best practices? What are your suggestions? We do have best practices and suggestions, but we don't have a ruler that we hold those up against. And so I think that's really how the census was born, was just us really hungry to understand at a baseline level, how are we doing as an industry? So I think the important elements to understand is the WFA, the World Federation of Advertisers, the census was global. We were in more than 20 countries. We had more than 10,000 respondents. And it really was, I can't give enough kudos to the WFA team. They engaged with lawyers probably in every known language.
I'm sure.
Because one of the things that you often get when you talk about diversity is, it's a sensitive topic. We can't ask people these questions. This data is sensitive, et cetera. And I am a firm believer of where there's a will, there's a way. So the WFA worked it out legally in many more countries than I could name off the top of my head. And essentially what we were looking for in this survey was not tell us what initiatives you're running, but we went at an employee level to say, what has been your lived experience within this industry? So it wasn't a survey to companies, it was a survey to the industry, to people, which is why we were really happy to get more than 10,000 respondents. And I would say that this year is year one for us. And so it's kind of a benchmark, but the goal is that we will rerun this survey year over year so that we'll be able to track progress along the way.
Oh, that's great. So before we dive into some of the data from the study, let's talk a little bit about you and some of the experiences that led you here. So how has your career experience shaped you both as a leader and also as an advocate for the employees that you're managing over at M6?
Ooh, that's a good one. My career experience has been really varied. It hasn't had much rhyme or reason, I guess. I've always been in advertising, but I've circled agency, trade bodies, brand, and done that loop a few times. I would say that I've always been led by things that interest me, but I think just like most people in the world, when you look back, the things that stand out are the people who gave you opportunities and the people who believed in you and the people who took chances on you. And I think I have been really well supported in my career as far as people giving me those opportunities. And so I've always just operated as that's the way we should treat people. I haven't known another way. And so once I pivoted from being an individual contributor to a manager, I treated people like my managers had treated me, which is like trying to develop them and bring out the best in them. And I think the longer, the more experience I've had, the longer I've been around, I've realized that that is one viewpoint in methodology, but it is certainly not the dominant viewpoint in methodology. And so even though I love media, I love tech, I led I was a lead facilitator for the WFA's work on cross-media measurement globally. Like I love all the nuts and the bolts of what we do, but I think so often we discard how we do it. And that piece is really important to me. I guess it's also not a secret that I'm a Black woman in advertising, and I am not the dominant phenotype in advertising. So I think, probably my experiences have been shaped from helping people who look like me feel comfortable and feel empowered and feel heard. And I don't think that's something that we do really well. So I think on the one hand, from a career perspective, I've really just run around after different challenges, and I don't care what the organization is, as long as I can learn and sink my teeth into something. But on the other hand, it's really been seeing that there aren't a lot of leaders that I've interacted with who are really concerned about the how. And so I feel like, that's important to me, and thus it is on me to help be the change we want to see. So I think that's the story of how I got here.
That's great. So before we talk a little bit about some of the results of the study, did you, I guess personally and also professionally, have any expectations before you saw the census come out?
Oh, for sure. So I would say over the past 12 months, what I think has been unique and a little different has just been how vocal marginalized people in the industry have been able to be. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, when I was at my first, second, third job in advertising, like there are just things that you would never say out loud. You would never write down on the internet because you'd never be hired anywhere again. And I think something that's different this time is, we are all, it feels like we're in a fucking union. We're like all collectively fighting for the thing, and we're all gonna say the hard stuff, and we're all really putting our necks out there. And I think that's something that sometimes people don't understand or doesn't get a lot of credit. It's really, really risky professionally, which means it's risky to your ability to pay for and support yourself and your family. But because we've been seeing this change in narrative and this, just courage and bravery overall, man, when we put the survey out, I was like, oh, we're going to get slaughtered. Like, we're going to have, we're going to rank in the bottom of everything. It's going to be so terrible. Everything's going to be broken. Like, that was not what I wanted to be. I wasn't gunning for it. But if we were, making a friendly wager, I would have put my money on like, man, the results are just going to make us cry.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's a good segue. Let's dive into the data a little bit. What were the most surprising results from the data that you received, if anything was overly surprising at all, or if there were so many things that were surprising, if you could actually choose one of them?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few things, and now that we're in conversation about this, I have to check myself to say, is it that it was surprising, or it's just didn't go the way that I wanted it to?
Right.
But what was, I guess, in this category of surprising to me was really the continued focus on gender disparity. And on the one hand, that's not surprising because yes, we have gender disparity within this industry. But on the other hand, when we talk about marginalized populations, excluded people, silenced minorities, a lot of times we try to bring those discussions to the table, and then people pivot and talk about gender and avoid the harder topic. And I've always been like, no, gender is important, but like, stay with me here. We're talking about race right now. Like, let's just talk about the hard thing. Let's focus our attention here. And so when the results came back, and a lot of the top line findings were around gender, were around age, were around family status, I was kind of like, this isn't what I wanted to talk about. But of course, it's not surprising. I tell people one of the moments that I've had professionally where I really like I actually took a break and my husband and I left New York for a little bit was when I came back to work after giving birth. There was a mom support group at the place that I worked, and we would just all get together and talk about like missing our kids' first words or first steps, or like all these really fucked up things that get normalized in a workplace. So I think although that isn't what I had hoped to be the headline and the focus, that's what popped through. And of course, validated survey of one by my own experiences. I think that definitely tracks.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. But yeah, I mean, you're so right. You're trying to get people to concentrate on some of the issues at hand that you really want to dive deep into, and it keeps coming back to one that is not necessarily as important to you or to the people you're talking to. It's like, come on, guys, let's concentrate on this. Let's try to solve this.
And I think to underline that a little bit, my view has always been like, this is probably not the most PC or sensitive way to say this, but anyone who knows me knows that I just stick my foot in my mouth all day long. But I feel like if we solve for the lowest common denominator, everything above that line gets fixed as well. And so it's not that I don't think we should focus on gender or on age or family status. All those things are really important. But I also believe that people who have those as considerations, plus they're Black, or plus they're immigrants, or plus they're Native, or plus English is not their first language, they're dealing with like a lot bigger issues than, your cis white woman from a privileged economic background who has a child. And so it's not been that one is more important than the other, but it's just been, if we can get down to the bottom of who is having the worst experience, focus on that person and solve for them, everyone's experience is going to get better. But if we start at the top and only solve for like this one use case, we're going to spend the rest of our lives, doing this over and over and over.
Right. Yeah. So, you mentioned that there was more than 10,000 respondents, which is great. Obviously, that's statistical relevance there. But were there any discrepancies in the data that you feel like might not be telling the whole story? Was there not enough mix of people? Was there not enough gender disparity? Was there not enough people from a diversity standpoint? Or did you feel like the data was all pretty much where we needed it to be?
Yeah, I mean, I am a perfectionist, so I will never tell you that something is where we need it to be, like no matter what it is, just period. I would say, so I was a little disheartened that our biggest takeaways and our biggest headlines were focusing on, again, the very surface level things to me, the non-intersectional pieces, which are age and gender. But once we started digging through deeper in the data, and especially in a country level, there were massive disparities between what white respondents were reporting as their experience and what ethnic minorities were reporting as their experience. I'm using the term ethnic minorities because we did this across more than 20 countries. So ethnic minority in the US is defined differently than it is in Poland, for example. And so we just use that classification as opposed to us calling out one global ethnic minority, even though the global ethnic minority is Black people. So we approached it in that way. And once you compare those numbers, you start to see really big disparities. Right. I don't know, I'm not ready to say that this was a failure in the data, but I will say, if you think about our industry, let's say our industry is 80% white. So if that's replicated, those percentages in the responses that we get, overwhelmingly, the majority of the data that we received were from white populations, majority populations, which means that if you look at them in aggregate, it doesn't really look terrible. You actually have to go down and get to the nuance, then really cross-tab from an ethnic minority perspective to understand, there is a deeper story here. That was never going to play out top line, I guess, or front and center, because the number of respondents that we had in those minorities was very small. But I also think that's just a function of the number that we employ in this industry is quite small.
How did it break out, if you know, how did it break out from a country standpoint? Was there, did the US have a fair majority of the 10,000 plus respondents?
Oh, we do have those numbers. I think the tricky thing is The US was very high, but when you look at the total population of the US, I think maybe the proportion of population to the US potentially was not as high as some countries. Right. And so I think, you know, we had really, really strong turnout in most major markets. The markets where we had smaller turnout, the populations of just human beings in those markets and then human beings working in advertising in those markets is quite small. So I think across the board, we were really happy. I'm thrilled that we've passed the 10,000 mark, but of course, like nothing's ever good enough for me. So we're going to continue to grow that as we do this year over year.
Right, no, that makes sense. So looking at some of the numbers, one of the things we always talk about is where are companies missing the mark? Where the biggest gaps lie? You know, one piece of evidence is there's still a strong gender pay gap, up to 20% in some cases in the US. So I guess, what do you think companies are still missing? And then in particular to the gender gap one, do you think that we're doing the right things or starting to at least do the right things to close that gap a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one. So my null hypothesis going into this survey was we are doing an incredible amount of initiative-based work that's not adding up to a hill of beans, to use a cheesy phrase, which is, you know, I think many people probably have their heart in the right place, in a wonderful place. I always love to remind people that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, we're technically doing things that feel good or sound good or seem like they should add up to good, but they're not adding up. And so we've got to solve that disconnect. Something that I've experienced and that I work with even within my own agency now is it's, you know, it feels good to be able to put up a headline on LinkedIn, but that's not the work. The work is completely dismantling the systems that guide how we work together. And if we don't have enough heart to stay in it and say, you know what, we need to completely overturn the way we're hiring and look at that from the bottom up through a lens of just being inclusive and equitable, like that's the work. And it's hard to put that in a press release. Like, there's not a cute photo on Instagram that says you really crushed that piece, but that's the work. And so I think what we have seen, or what at least my non-quantitative scientific mind is saying that I am seeing in this data, is the people are taking action, but they're not the systemic action. People are doing things, but they're not doing the hard things. People are going there, but they're not going like really deep. And I think now we've had a couple of cycles of kind of press release diversity that we are starting to acknowledge that, hey, if you want to make movement, like you got to be really in, you got to be fully down, you got to show up every day, you got to take a lot of L's before you pull out your first W. And so that's what I took away from it. For everything we're doing, there's still a lot that needs to be done. And should we be focusing in areas that take longer time, that require more funding and investment, that are harder, that won't score us, you know, a press release win?
Right, I completely agree. I think people do need to understand, and these companies need to understand, that this is not going to be an overnight win. It takes the work, it takes the practice, it takes, you know, the working together of the entire management team, of the entire organization. It's not going to be a one-person show, a one-person win. It really needs that collaboration of everyone working together. And it is going to be hard in a lot of organizations, especially ones that have set a precedent that's not in the way that we need it to be. So I 100% agree. There's going to be L's, and you can't, you know, get discouraged about that. You have to just keep plowing through until you do get those W's. And it's a process, but I think we all need to make sure that our companies are going through it and doing it diligently.
Yeah. I would also say, just again, from now leading an entire region for M6, it's also exhausting. It's so easy to just be like, oh my God, can we be done talking about this already? Or like, oh, there's another thing that needs to be dismantled and undone. Like, when does it end? So I just, you know, it's exhausting, it's tough, but you just got to stick through it.
Yeah, no, you absolutely do. You know, so another thing when you're talking about, what's interesting now is obviously COVID has completely flipped upside down the way that we work on a daily basis from from a being in the office standpoint, working from home. So many companies switching to this flexible work environment and work from home, we have what we're calling a work from anywhere policy. So you see so many stats out there. And one of the ones that we talked about was 40% of women agree that their family status can actually hinder their career. So we see a lot of things like this, but do you feel like because of this new work environment that we have, does that change in the near future? Does that make that not as much of a situation as it felt like it's been in the past?
I would actually, I'm going to give you my opinion, but then I would love to hear yours.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess my lived experience has been that people who are already getting screwed are getting more screwed now. And what I mean by that is so yes, I'm a Black woman. I'm also an introvert. I'm a Libra. I don't love confrontation. I try not to say things just to hear myself speak. And that's really hard on Zoom because it's just people screaming over each other all day. And it is so easy for me to go through an entire meeting and not say one word unless I feel like I have to cut someone off and be a little rude and elbow my way in. Yeah. And so that was, at least I feel like in the before times, it was a little easy for me to have body language signals or maybe stand up from my chair or really prep people of hey, I'm Auntie over here, I want to talk. So that has gotten more difficult for me. I think that as a mom, I have a wonderful, wonderful husband who probably does 80% of the lifting with my child, and I'm very lucky, but my kid still drives me absolutely nuts. When he sees I'm on Zoom, he just wants to be in the camera. He never needs help with anything unless I'm talking to someone else. And so there are some workplaces who have leaned into this and said, let's normalize being humans and having families, which is great. But even I have been on calls where, people notice that my child's in the background, but they're trying not to acknowledge it. And then that makes it weird for me. And then do I have to go off camera to deal with this thing? And it's weird. And so I think one thing that I love about working remote and in the different ways that we have decided to work together during the pandemic is, I only have to get up 10 minutes before my first meeting. Right. I get to do panels like this much more frequently because I don't have to travel to a place to sit on a stage and record. But at the same time, the hindrances that were present for me in physical real life, I guess, feel exacerbated to me in many ways. So I think that's kind of the first piece of my answer. And the second piece is I'm really curious to see how employers treat hybrid working, because I feel like this happened a little bit this summer, which is, oh, we're hip, we're cool, you guys can work from anywhere, you've been doing such a good job, go for it. And then as soon as vaccines came out this summer, it was all right, everybody back in the office. And so, then Delta variant, oh, we're cool, we're cool, you guys can work wherever you want. Booster shots, okay, everybody come back in the office. So I am kind of curious to see where is the pendulum gonna fall. Yes. My perspective is I want us to be together, but not if it makes you feel weird. I want us to be together, but not if it doesn't seem safe or logical. So right. Let's work wherever we want to work. But I think we still have a ways to go to see how employers are going to react to that. But I would love to hear your take on, what's changed and what's been different for you in the past 18 months working from Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll take it from the same two perspectives you did. So I have 3 kids, and last year when all of this happened, it was interesting because they were working, they had a hybrid school model. So 3 days a week, they were at home, they're a little older. So they're 15, 12, and 10. So they were on their Zooms, and, Wi-Fi was at its capacity and the internet connections stunk. And they were coming in because they needed help with a homework thing, or my youngest, who's 10, liked to show her face on the Zoom. And, I think the thing for me, when I was doing internal calls, it made everyone yes, we collaborate at the office and we do everything together and we're really sharing things. But everyone at the end of the day goes home and they have their family life. But you were in people's family lives. You saw their cat walk across their keyboard, or their dog is barking in the background because someone rang the doorbell delivering a package. So it was a completely different dynamic than it's ever been before. But to your point about like some people not being, it was weird to see sometimes when you're on with a client or, I'm in the middle of doing a pitch with a brand and something like that happens. I don't know that person necessarily as personally, so I'm not sure if they're okay with that or if they're not okay with that. So it definitely did provide, such an interesting dynamic. And I think that, from the perspective, I'm a very hands-on dad. I coach my kids' sports and I'm doing everything and I do all these different things like that. And it was, I think for both men and women, it has added a different perspective and a different family dynamic and a different work-life balance. And, I'm walking from my office to the living room 5 feet away. Did work or does work ever end? I don't know. Not really. So I think that part of it has definitely been something that we're all trying to adapt and adjust to. And from a corporate standpoint, we really are, we leaned into everyone work, I said we have a work from anywhere policy. We're not requiring people to go into the office a certain amount of days. At this point right now, we don't think we're going to. We have some people who have positions that they don't necessarily need to come into the office. So why are we going to make them commute from, Fairfield County, Connecticut or Long Island or, Cherry Hill, New Jersey to get to the city just to sit there and do what they can do at home in the office just because we say they need to be there. I run the sales organization. So I think from a sales perspective, I think the team does need to be there, does need to be collaborating, at least when they have meetings and when they're entertaining. And that's what we've seen. We've seen a lot more of our clients are much more open to doing some entertaining. Let's go to a game. Let's go to a concert. Let's grab dinner and meet over dinner. We're not doing meetings in your guys' agencies yet. You guys aren't coming to our offices yet, but we are still getting together when people feel comfortable and getting that kind of cool collaboration that we've always had. And I think that part of it is starting to feel normal again. And my team at least feels very energetic and really wants to get out there and be doing that. But it's definitely going to be interesting how this next 6 months to a year plays out and how many, like we have some people on our side, on the vendor side that are requiring people to go into the office 3 or 4 times a week. And it's actually helping us from a recruitment standpoint that we have this work from anywhere policy because we have a lot of job openings right now and people are saying, wow, so if I come there, I don't necessarily need to be in the office a certain amount of days a week. Oh, that sounds really attractive. Or I'm going to be helping and supporting New York-based salespeople, but I can actually be living in Kansas City. That's great. So it's opened up our pool of people that we can bring into certain positions to national versus just in a specific geo area. So it's given us the opportunity to actually go for and really be a little bit more selective with the talent we bring in because we have a bigger pool to choose from. So that's been an interesting part of it too.
I think that's also one of the full circle insights, which is, so I'll just give an example from when I was in EA. I was fanatical about having a balanced team, having a good gender balance, having diversity on the team. The profile of person who can afford to live in the San Francisco Bay Area on a media buyer's salary is not diverse. And so it was so hard to recruit a diverse team because of the geography that we were in. And I think one of the ways that we've kind of democratized access to roles has been through remote hiring. The flip side of that coin, though, is as we think about like taking clients out to dinner, going to games, there are some people who live in Alabama and they're not ever going to be able to do that ever. And so then it's like, okay, we brought in all of these diverse people, but now we're providing an experience like they can't possibly physically engage with. So what does inclusion look like in a hybrid world? And it's just all of these new things that I don't have answers to yet, but I think you're right. I'm really happy to hear you say over the next 6 to 12 months, because I do think it's going to be quite a long time still until we really start to like have our sea legs under us and think about how we operate like this.
I think so too. It's definitely the long game. It's not going to be an overnight decision for sure. Cool. So, I think one of the other things, kind of the third pillar that we wanted to talk about was, moving all of this forward. What are we going to be doing to make a difference, to really try to take some of the findings that we have from this study and do the work as we talked about earlier. One of the things that we're doing at Undertone is we launched what we're calling the Uplift Collective. And it's essentially a premium portfolio of publishers that we work with that are minority, women, LGBTQIA plus owned, and also those who are committed to advancing social justice, environmental sustainability, and equal representation. And this portfolio enables us to connect our publishers with demand opportunities from agencies like you guys and from clients, from premium advertisers, while providing brands the ability to support these underrepresented communities and global causes via mindful media buys.
Yeah.
And each one of these campaigns that runs on our collective, we're going to be donating a portion of that campaign's proceeds to relevant charities, to organizations that are determined by either the publishers or the brand partners, or in some cases, both. So this has, been a really successful initiative for us. We love the fact that we're able to go out in the marketplace with something like this to bring to our partners and to help them to fulfill some of the promises that they're making out there in the field.
Yeah.
But what actions like this can our industry be doing to make progress? Or what are some of the things that you've seen or that M6 is doing that you think is going to help the results of this census improve over the next couple of years that you guys continue to do it?
Yeah, I mean, so your initiative sounds fantastic, and I want to hear more about what client feedback has been. And I think that's one important thing is, yes, people need to do the work themselves, but we also have to help people along. And so many of our conversations at the WFA are just, friend to friend with me and others is, what can I do? Like, where do I start? And so I think, the initiative that you described in like really packaging up, here's something you can turn on tomorrow. Like, you actually have no excuse to not be doing this. Right. It's very helpful. And I would say there are similar initiatives. So we're part of the Group M family, and whenever I can, I like to shout out Kirk McDonald as my forever president. But we've been doing the same thing with the 2% pledge, with the Black upfronts, with curated PMPs, and like really trying to make those things so obvious that it's a little weird if you don't do it. But I think, in addition to that, we are starting, so one of the other things I do, sorry, I'm just rambling right now.
No, please.
But I sit on a board at a college who has a curriculum about global communications. And so we advise them on what should be a part of the curriculum. And we're talking right now about DEI. And my I guess, challenge has been, we have research now. Like, we have longitudinal research. We have peer-reviewed scholarly white papers. We have years and years of study to be able to start to codify what are the best practices here. One book that was such a quick read that I really, really love is Diversity, Inc. And Diversity, Inc. goes all the way back, I think, either to the 70s or 80s, when companies first started being sued for purposely not hiring Black Americans. And it very clearly plots, like, here's what the judge said they had to do. So they made an internal benchmark. In order to meet that benchmark, they realized they had to change 3 things. This is where the Rooney Rule comes in and things like that. When they instituted these 3 things, they were able to hit their benchmark, and like, look at that. So I just say that to say that I do think there are, if you look for it, places you can go and strategies you can find that are documented over time that are very effective at moving the needle. My personal, hot take of one, as a human and not as the CEO of anything, has been going into corporations who just don't want to be that bothered about it. Like, to have a quota, to explain to your company why you have a quota, to say we're not doing referrals anymore, and to say we're really working towards this number, and that means we have to tweak these 3 things. Like, that takes your entire organization galvanizing and like believing and internalizing that mission, and it's really hard work. And I think, we know what works, we can do it, it's just not the easy path. And so I think what we're going to see pretty soon is who was only ever in it for the easy path, and who really is in it because they want to do something and because they want to change something. And so what we have committed to as the WFA is that for the next year, until we run the next iteration of this, which will actually be early 23, our agenda is going to be solely focused on championing initiatives in the industry that make tangible, meaningful impact. Because when we reissue the survey, we want to see that things have gotten better. Like, can you imagine how deflating it will be to do this, get more than 10,000 results, reissue in 23, and we're at the same place, or we're behind where we were? So we really are using this as a way to hold ourselves accountable and hold our own feet to the fire and say, we really have to do the stuff that's going to move that number and not the stuff that's going to make us feel good.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, because we are starting to see a little bit of that, of people who just put the message out there, got the PR bang with it, and it's been kind of fluff. I mean, I saw an article actually in Portada today where it talked about, despite the plans of leading media organizations to have all this change from a minority media buy standpoint, from devoting a certain percentage of their media buys to minority owned businesses, that those publishers have seen little change at this point from a boost standpoint. And it's like, okay, guys, are we really making tangible results happen? Are we really putting our money where our mouth is and making these things happen? And it's it's showing that not that many have. We know Group M has done a great job of it, and they are putting their money where their mouth is, but some of the other organizations out there have not quite done what they said they were going to do yet. And sure, some of this stuff takes a little bit of time to get together and to really get an initiative forward. Taking 5% of your overall revenue or your overall media budgets and putting them towards these businesses takes a lot of work and takes planning and strategy and all that, of course. But at least from my personal perspective, I would have hoped that we would have seen things progress a little faster since these announcements were made, probably back in June and so forth. And now we're, almost 4, 5, 6 months later.
Well, the other thing that I like to remind people is it does take a lot of work and a lot of strategy. It's not harder than figuring out how to use TikTok as an advertising vehicle.
Right.
It's not harder than auditing your programmatic supply chain. It's not harder than like redoing your global agency agreements. All of these things we have the heart and we have the stomach to do, and they're quite difficult. So I refuse to accept it's hard, it takes a long time when we get into this space, because it's like, yeah, but that's the business. That's what we all signed up for. So yeah, I think about that a lot. I think the other thing, as you were talking, you reminded me of one of the statistics here from the census, which was in the US, I think it was something close to 80% of respondents feel like their companies are taking action to be more diverse or action to be more inclusive. And out of those respondents, out of that same pool of 80% think we're doing more, almost 20% of them are going to leave their job or leave the industry altogether based on discrimination and lack of inclusion. And so to me, I loved seeing that, because it was like, yeah, you guys are saying a lot and you're doing a lot. And I know things are happening and I know you're taking steps, but I'm also probably going to quit because it's awful here. So,
right.
Again, it's just like the actions that you're taking being aligned with the impacts that you want to see.
Right. So how can companies, we're talking about the industry on a whole, but how can companies do a better job of making sure that their own employees do feel more included and do feel like they're being treated fairly?
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak for some things that we are trying. Yeah. And I think the number one most important thing is to have a mechanism for listening to your employees, because we all get into these rooms and we assume that we know what the problem is, or we assume that we know what the solution is. And there's nothing actually more healthy or powerful than giving the people who you're trying to design for a chance to respond to you about how it's going. We did an internal panel for Black History Month, because Black History Month is October in the UK. So I get to celebrate twice every year, which is great. But we did our Black History Month panel, and someone in the agency was like, well, what would you say to me if I were to tell you that I don't think you guys are doing enough? And my response to that is like, great, please tell us what we should be doing, because I am thinking through the lens of someone who's a regional CEO, which is completely probably divorced or out of touch with the experience the majority of our employees are happening. So I do think having a mechanism to listen so that we're not doing things that solve our problems or make us feel good, but actually, you know, improve the lives of the people who say we want to impact is important. And other than, and I think the other thing I would say is measure it, but listening works well. So like we'll do a pulse or an inclusion survey, we'll publish those results. We will take some action, we'll repeat the survey, we'll talk about it. And so I think that's just a good cadence to get into as a business. Listen, be prepared to share those results, take some action, repeat, repeat, repeat.
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and one of the panelists, who's a CMO at a pretty major company, said that they actually installed a forum where a Zoom forum where people can actually come on a weekly basis and talk about things that they're going through, you know, in a no judgment zone. And she was actually a little skeptical at first. She wasn't sure if people were going to actually open up, if people were going to talk about their experiences. And she said, you know, all it took was 1 or 2 people to kind of be brave and do it. And now every week there's 50 to 75 people that join. She joins religiously every week. And it's everything from all, you know, from the minority standpoint, women, LGBTQIA, everyone is part of this forum and really sharing. And it's given them as an organization a lot of different ideas to go back to and kind of chew over and see if there are things that they'd want to implement from an organizational standpoint. And I thought that was a great idea. I was really interested in the fact that they had so many people that were open to it and actually started sharing and started opening up.
Yeah, I think that's a great, I think that speaks volumes on the culture in such a place, because I've been a part of many corporate discussions where everyone gets on Zoom and looks at each other and it feels really painful.
Yeah, no, exactly. So we're running out of time, but let's go with one last question before we open it up to any questions out there. But I guess if there was one takeaway that you would want the listeners today to take into their day-to-day to help really push for change from the census, or even from your own experience with it, what would that be?
I feel like from the moment I agreed to be on this panel, I should have prepared for this question, but I don't have a quick answer. I don't know. I think one is, if you are in a place where you can ask or demand for more transparency, that tends to be an incredible first step. And, you know, it's hard for me to answer this question because people's willingness to engage is so different. Like, we're all coming from different perspectives. So I can't say like, here's the one thing to do, right. But I do think measurement, transparency, being open about your wins or losses or what the problems are or what works well, is always a really great first step. And I guess I would just plug myself and say, when we do the survey again, I want all of you to take it so that we can get to 20,000 respondents next time.
Absolutely. I like that one. That's a good one for sure. Okay, great. Well, if anyone in the audience has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat here.
I haven't seen so many come through. Maybe it's just because we're such good panelists.
We're answering everything for them.
No stone left unturned.
I mean, I think I'm looking in the right place here in the chat. Q&A, no open questions.
Yeah, we're good to go. So that's my plug. What's your plug? What would you ask people to do?
I would, you know, I think the same thing. I really love when people come forward and speak their mind. I really, from a management standpoint, have an open door policy. I like to listen. I like to have my teams come to me with open-ended ideas that they want to bring to the table. So I would say that from my organizational standpoint, let's have open conversations. Let's have dialogue. Let's make sure that we're having the hard conversations, because that's the only way that we're going to move forward, is if we're talking about the things that are difficult and making the decisions that are hard for our organization. So I welcome those conversations, and not only within my own organization, but within the industry. I mean, I know that I'm always willing to help out. I'm always willing to be a part of that. So let's team up together and let's make sure we're doing the right things across this industry of ours.
Sounds good. Thanks for the chat. This was really fun.
All right. Thank you, Belinda. Have a great day. We'll talk soon.
You too.